Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it is a breaking news edition of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. Big recruiting news for Ohio State as they say land a commitment from running back James Peoples out of San Antonio, Texas. He was just on campus this weekend. Got to see him hanging around with Travion Henderson a lot at practice on Saturday. And I got to tell you, Tony, looking at him, it was kind of like one of these guys has been a Big Ten running back already for a couple seasons, and the other one is still in high school. And I honestly could not necessarily tell which one was which.
James People listed at 5'10", 192, about the same size as J.K. Dobbins back in the day in the class of 2017. People's a nice prospect, listed as the number 69 overall player in the 24/7 composite, the number 5 running back in the class. I think watching his highlights, he's obviously tough to bring down. He's not the biggest guy, but he can run through tackles. I don't know how, I don't know. I don't think he's J.K. Dobbins fast. And when I say that, I know people will be like, I saw J.K. Dobbins get tackled from behind. He can't be all that fast. But he was fast back in the day. And I don't know that Peoples is that fast, but fast enough to get from point A to point B without being caught by some very talented defensive teams in his level of school. Was a first team All-State. Rushed for, I think, 1,900 yards as a junior that last year. 1,904 yards, 28 touchdowns. So a good start to a running back class that will probably be 2 and makes up for the earlier miss of Jordan Marshall out of Moeller. And so, if you're going to miss on an in-state guy, I guess it's okay if you get a guy who's rated higher and plays big-time Texas football.
It reminds me a little bit. Do you remember the Jackson Carman miss when Ohio State didn't get him? And another Cincinnati area prospect and very highly touted. And how can Ohio State miss on this in-state player? And then they ended up in that class instead landing Nick Petit-Frere, who is a higher-rated version of the same player from a state down south that plays pretty serious big boy football. He was from the Tampa area, which is not necessarily the biggest metropolitan area in terms of high school football in the state of Florida, but James Peoples is coming from San Antonio, which is not necessarily the biggest metropolitan area in terms of high school football in Texas, but still a pretty big, a pretty top level Texas high school prospect. That's an area that produces a football player or two every now and then. So yeah, it does feel very much like that Jackson Carman, Nick Petit-Frere kind of situation where Ohio State constantly talks about next man up in terms of depth chart, and it's kind of next man up in terms of recruiting in this case as well.
And James People is a guy that they kind of latched onto pretty early, and those he came together in the school, and it seemed like to a lot of people that he may have been close to the number 1 target at running back for Ohio State. So to get one of your top targets, always a good thing. And now if you look at Ohio State's just skill class, it's him, it's Jeremiah Smith. Jeremiah Smith, of course, 5-star wide receiver out of Florida, the number 2 overall prospect in the nation. And I can hear also people saying, yeah, but you need people in the trenches. Well, you got, 3 or 4 offensive linemen committed right now, 4 offensive linemen committed right now. They're certainly going to be attacking the defensive side of the ball, but the skill recruiting at Ohio State continues to be pretty good. And Aaron Nolan, the quarterback, was on campus this weekend. He finally got his offer, but now James Peoples, Jeremiah Smith, I guess if you're going to start a class offensively, that's a pretty good 2 to start it with.
Yeah, and those guys were both on campus this weekend. Jeremiah Smith, I don't believe, was there, but someone else who was there was another 5-star wide receiver, Mylan Graham, out of New Haven, Indiana. He was there. He's ranked 27th overall in the composite and is someone who I think is broadly considered a strong Ohio State lean. So they might, exclusive must credit, Brian Hartline might be about ready to bring in yet another 5-star wide receiver to bolster the skill talent at that in that class. And, Sam Williams-Dixon, an in-state running back who is in Pickerington now, he's someone who could be the second running back in the class. And then, is this a year that they bring in 2 tight ends? This could be a very, very heavy offensive skill kind of class. I'm guessing it's going to be a pretty big class as well, just based on, this is probably, they've got 3 offensive linemen in state already committed, plus Ian Moore. This is going to be a pretty big class, and they're off to a very, very good start on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mylan Graham, and for my money, he's like the most explosive receiver prospect that I've seen Ohio State go after. He reminds me just how fast he is of Ted Ginn, like different styles, but just a really just faster than everybody else, but not quite the strider that Ted Ginn is. So he's able to move even a little quicker, and he would probably be the top receiver. He would be maybe the top receiver in the nation if it weren't for this J.J. Smith, this Jeremiah Smith guy, taking all the attention away from him. And I saw Marvin Harrison tweet out recently that there's comparisons of Jeremiah Smith and Marvin Harrison, and so there's it's just reloading, if you will. Sam Williams-Dixon is interesting to me, and you mentioned him. He's one of the top running backs in Ohio. Goes from somewhere in Holmes County, Tom. You were hoping he would stick in Holmes County and then commit to Ohio State and finally give Ohio State a Buckeye from Holmes County. Transfers to Pickerington North, some big-time football. So I'm interested to see what he can do there this year, and really, because right now he's the number 655 player in the nation, which you would probably expect from somebody from Holmes County. But now he's moving to a place where everybody's going to see him, so it'll be interesting to see how he rises up the rankings there. But I'm with you. It's going to be pretty skill-heavy, and with as many guys as they're going to be losing at running back and receiver over this next year, a year or two, like, you need as many as you can get.
Yeah, I mean, they thought they were going to at one point bring in 2 running backs in the 2023 class, and then ended up bringing 0 running backs in the 2023 class. So that puts even more onus on them to bring in a pair this year, because after this year, anyone in that running back room except for Dallin Hayden could theoretically turn pro, which is crazy because, it feels like Evan Pryor just got here. You've barely seen anything from Evan Pryor. Evan Pryor could, if Evan Pryor has a big year this year, could declare for the NFL draft after this season. But you've also got Travion Henderson, you got Mayan Williams, you got Chip Trayanum, all those guys, those 4 guys could all theoretically be gone after the season. And, realistically, I can't imagine they have 4 guys turn pro out of one position group, especially if it's running back after one season. But, you have to kind of plan ahead. And this is a spot where not everyone is going to be able to step on the field day one, like a J.K. Dobbins did, like a Travion Henderson did. There are guys who are going to take a little bit longer to develop. So you have to restock that room now, sort of in anticipation of losing, probably Mayan Williams after the year, probably Chip Trayanum after the year, maybe Travion Henderson after the year. I mean, you sort of assume you're going to lose multiple of those guys and restock that room. So getting 2 this year is going to be big. You might even end up with one and maybe 2 next year as well, because there's kind of that big bubble moving along in that room, and once those guys are gone, you are going to be down to you're going to be a little thin there again.
Yeah, you look at the receivers they'll be losing with. You assume Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka will be leaving after their junior year. Julian Fleming, Xavier Johnson. So just the amount of experienced skill that you are losing. You're going to be losing thousands of yards of production, maybe 100 total career touchdowns, that sort of thing. And you can't. You got to replace it as quickly as you can. And you can't be like, well, let's see what the 25 class says. No, you got to go do it now. And you can't. It's not the NFL. You can't tank like the Bears. I don't want them to be too good this year. I want them to be able to, go ahead and get Marvin Harrison. Starve for Marv, that sort of thing. You can't do that, obviously, in college football. You've got to get as many guys as you can, and they're setting up pretty well. I want to touch on Aaron Noland real quick because, like I said, they did offer him this weekend finally. he appears to be the top target for the Buckeyes now at quarterback. A lefty. He's got a pretty compact delivery, I think, and a ton of yards, a ton of production. Has played well for a number of years now, and Georgia, is that correct, Tom?
Yes,
yeah,
Georgia,
and big time football. And the last time Ohio State had a lefty throwing the ball was Steve Belisari, and nobody since, even any backup lefties in that time.
Rick McFadden was a lefty I mean, he was out of the Youngstown area, and like he was on the 2002, 2003 maybe teams. Other than that, I'm not coming up with any off the top of my head. And, you know, as a lefty myself, I feel like he should not be discriminated against because of his left-handedness. He's someone who, you know, looks the part of the quarterback. We got to see him up close on Saturday at that practice. You know, good size, good, you know, solidly built, not someone who looks like, oh boy, he's going to have to spend a couple of years bulking up before he's ready to play at the college level. And, you know, that's another spot where he probably doesn't need to, that's another spot where you don't necessarily need him to come in immediately and play, but you've got to get a guy who can play every year because, you know, you mentioned all these guys who could be gone after this next upcoming season. Jaden Ballard could theoretically be gone after this upcoming season, which is crazy. Like, you get these guys who it seems like they just got here and they're already theoretically draft eligible after the end of the upcoming season. Kyle McCord feels like he just got here. He's going to be draft eligible after the upcoming season. If he goes pro and Aaron Nolan comes in next year, well, then Devin Brown could be draft eligible after the following season, after Aaron Nolan's freshman season. So then it's, you know, could just be Lincoln Keenholz and Aaron Nolan and whoever they bring in 2025. And again, we're saying this as if all of this is a done deal. Nolan is set to commit on Saturday the 8th. Certainly feels like it is trending generally in Ohio State's direction, but we'll kind of find out in about a week. But, you know, that's another spot where you got to keep stock in that room because, you know, this is kind of an updated version of the old Jim Tressel recruiting is like shaving. If you miss a day, you look terrible. Recruiting quarterbacks, you got to get one every year because with the way the portal goes, with the way, you know, just college football in general is going, and with the way Ohio State's churning out quarterbacks in the NFL draft, you have to get a guy every year. Because if you miss one, or if you miss on one class, or you get a guy you're not really, just kind of like a backup kind of guy, you know, the safety school equivalent of quarterback, boy, you're pretty thin in that room if you're down to two guys you really trust and not three. And Ryan Day has said he wants four. That's a very hard thing to get these days. They brought in Tristan Gebbia out of Oregon State as, you know, to kind of build out that room a little bit for this year. But it is hard to do it, and it's impossible to do it almost if you don't bring in a quarterback every year. And, you know, same thing with the running backs and all of that. I
think you're going to start seeing with the quarterbacks, they'll be able to have three, but the new move is going to be the Tristan Gebbia, the what's his face from Washington State, where you're going to use that last year as kind of a graduate assistant type of year. I want to get into coaching, so I'll go somewhere that I can do that. And that's how you get your fourth guy who isn't expecting to start. But so there you go. James Peoples commits to Ohio State. Do you know Ezekiel Elliott? And I said James Peoples, the number 5 running back in the nation, number 69 overall prospect. Ezekiel Elliott, number 69 overall prospect in the 2013 class, number 5 overall all-purpose back. Back in the day when they distinguished between the third down backs like Ezekiel Elliott, who could only mainly just catch it and run it a little bit, as opposed to the real running backs.
Yeah, he was a real Curtis Samuel type, wasn't he? A real yeah. Who was the guy? Dontre Wilson. He was real Dontre Wilson type. That Ezekiel Elliott couldn't trust him between the tackles. Tony, that was I've said it for years and I'll say it now. He'll never last in the NFL.
Couldn't agree more, Tom. Well said. So that will do it. I want to thank you all for joining us. Obviously, an emergency edition with a new addition to the Ohio State recruiting class of 2024 with James Peoples out of Texas. That will do it for today. Thank you all for joining us. Reminder to check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. We're talking about James Peoples there right now, talking about the recruiting class going on, and much, much more. So thank you all, and we'll talk to you guys later.